Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Let's do a quick exercise together. Imagine you're a brand new CMO at a B2B tech company. Where do you start day one? What's on your 30, 60, and 90-day plan? Sure, you're going to talk to a lot of people, but how do you determine who to listen to and who not to listen to? How do you discover what's really driving the business forward and what needs to be fixed? Do you reject all of the previous brand thinking from the former CMO and fire the agency? How long do you have before better results are expected? Do you put the emphasis on short-term demand generation while you're trying to figure out the long-term branding strategy? There are a lot of steps to take in this process in this first 100 days, not to mention sort of getting the CEO and the board of directors on the same page. Now, speaking of Paige, my guest today is Paige O'Neill. Paige is the relatively new CMO of Sitecore, a global software company known for both its content management system and its digital marketing system. As a veteran CMO for various B2B tech companies, Paige is a great person to talk about this often overlooked topic, or certainly it's been overlooked on Renegade Thinkers Unite. And so we're going to talk about how do you as a CMO get off to a good start, making sure that those first 90 days set the foundation for your plan ahead. So we're going to talk about that in the episode. And Paige, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Drew. I'm thrilled to be here.
So a funny story before we get started. So Paige and I actually met on LinkedIn. She was kind enough to reach out. I admired her curiosity. This was someone who just said, hey, I want to keep learning. You seem to be a person who knows a lot about stuff of marketing. And so anyway, we started a dialogue there, and you've listened to a number of episodes, right?
I have. I am a regular listener, first time caller, regular listener.
First time caller. Love it. Okay. So, and there's some of these episodes get pretty heady. We've talked about some of them, but I think this one is going to be really, really instructive. But first, let's do Renegade Rapid Fire. Paige, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. What's your definition of marketing?
My definition of marketing is telling market and customer stories that create product demand.
Okay. And what, therefore, is the primary role of the CMO?
I think the primary role of the CMO is to be the chief synthesizer. You have to really distill market trends, research, the customer stories, all the data that you have in the business, your product attributes, and you have to distill that into messaging and programs that essentially drive demand.
So, forgetting this one for a moment, let's just look past jobs. What's your favorite part of being a CMO?
My favorite part of being a CMO is it's really figuring out the story that needs to be told and how to tell that story. I love going out and doing the work to talk to the customers, the analysts, go through all the research, and then figure out what does this company need to be talking about right now.
It's funny, when Paige and I were talking earlier, she mentioned a few of the episodes that she listened to, and sure enough, they were on storytelling. The one with David Acker, the one, there was an early one with Chandar from Marketo, and a more recent one all about storytelling, and of course the one with Rich Kyleberg about storytelling. So funny enough how that aligns. What's your least favorite part of the job?
I'd have to say budgeting.
Okay, it makes sense. That's a hard part. What's your proudest moment as a marketer?
You know, there have been so many. I think it always comes down to those breakthrough moments that you have with either your team or customers around, not surprisingly, messaging and storytelling. I think the best ideas always come from that combination of listening to what your customers are trying to solve and then creating a space or an environment for your team to be creative and have those aha moments. And those moments that you have with either your teams or your customers, those are always my favorites.
And is there a specific one that you can recall?
Yeah, I it's been a long time ago now. At Primo, we were doing a customer conference, and we were trying to figure out how to tell our story. And it was a time in marketing when we were kind of coming out of a recession. The CMO tenure was shrinking. Digital channels were coming on strong, and marketers were really struggling to figure them out. And one of our customers said, "We need to have a revolution." And it was just such a powerful aha moment that it turned into a Primo creating a fantastic thought leadership campaign called the Marketing Revolution, which is one of the most successful campaigns that I've ever been part of, and turned into a model for thought leadership that I've taken with me to every company since then.
Oh, that's very cool. I want to hear more about that when we finish this. So, is there another moment that sort of you would describe as a renegade thing that you've done in your career?
I think probably the most renegade thing that I've done is when storytelling, creating a thought leadership campaign or content that actually questioned the validity of the products we were selling at the time. And kind of having a conversation around marketing is changing so dramatically. Customers are doing things so differently, and so things like marketing campaigns are dead. That kind of a really provocative campaign, when at the time my company was selling marketing campaign software.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's funny because I was on the subway last night, and I was looking at an ad campaign in the subway, as you often do, because you're captured right there. And it was people sort of young millennials and younger lying on couches. It was, I think the company was Burrow, and the tagline was "Good for nothing." And these individuals, they had little lines that they were sort of lying on the couch, and it's like, if you need me to do something, don't. It was this moment of withdrawing, and then just the whole notion of saying, "Hey, we sell stuff that is good for nothing." I thought was hilarious, but it also has that sort of contrarian approach that you're describing.
I think the millennials have been a fodder for a lot of marketers rethinking their approach, and this campaign was also with regard to millennials as well, because they don't want to get marketing campaigns in the traditional way, and so I think you've got to question the way we do things as technology and as our audiences move forward.
So is there, since you've been listening to some of the shows, I can ask this question. Is there a brand that you admire that hasn't already been mentioned on this show?
Well, this is a very popular brand. I haven't heard them mentioned on the show, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were at some point. I have to say Sephora, and I had the fantastic opportunity to talk to their CTO at an event that we did a few weeks ago. And I'm a huge Sephora customer, and after understanding more about how they're approaching their customer journey and understanding their customer, they're just so impressive. They've really got the mix right between understanding who their target is, what their needs are, how they're buying, creating personalized experiences for them, and they're just a company that I think is hitting it out of the park.
Very interesting. I'll have to look them study them a little more. It might surprise you, but I haven't spent a lot of time in that store. But I have been in one.
Well, the CTO, who is a man, told me that part of his onboarding process was going into the store and getting a full-on makeover. So he really enjoyed that.
There you go. Sign up for my mani pedi. You never know. All right. So, is there a recent book that you've read that's made you rethink something?
The book that I just finished reading a couple of weeks before I started my job at Sitecore is a book called A Good Time to Be a Girl. And I think there's obviously a lot of talk happening right now about women in business and #MeToo. And this book took a really interesting perspective that did make me rethink my approach, because, I have to say that as a woman of a certain age, I spent a lot of time coming up in business and thinking that I had to emulate male leader figures. And this book basically says, women of the new generations shouldn't do that, and they don't have to do that. They can be authentically female and find ways to empower the business and their leadership style through the feminine approach. And I think that women have to really think about going forward, are we making room for those types of environments and conversations in business that pay homage to the female attribute and style of leadership versus the male style of leadership?
I think that's really, it's interesting. It's a subject that's come off with some of my female guests. And I really want to dive into that and make a whole show about that. But it's interesting to me that the title is a good time to be a girl and not a woman. And
yeah.
Do they make a point of sharing why?
A little bit. I mean, I think it's more just kind of trying to simplify the dynamics in business and going back to, when we were children, thinking about a girl versus a boy and what is a girl's role versus a boy's role in society. So there's a little bit of talk about that in the beginning of the book.
Oh, it's funny. There was an article recently, I think it was in the Times, about how girls do more homework, and they also have to do more chores at home. And of course, we shared it with our kids, and my son raised a hand and said, "Heck, no, not in our house. I did a lot more than my sister." But anyway, I think it's true, and that's sort of the whole point of that research study, was to demonstrate that we just sort of train our daughters differently from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Which is fascinating. All right. So 2 more questions on this and then we'll wrap up. What's the best advice you were ever given?
The best advice I was ever given was that, I think a lot of leaders like to drive change in the organization, and I certainly consider myself to be a change agent. But someone once told me that if you're charging ahead to drive change, you need to make sure to look behind you to see that the team is actually following you and that they're bought into the change you're trying to drive. And it's so true. It was really a big moment for me as a leader to realize that you need to spend more time making sure everyone understands their role, is bought in, has participated in the process, and then we can charge ahead and drive the change.
That's so funny. As you're telling me that, I have visions of the leader charging the hill and all the people sort of back in the background, not moving an inch. So
arms crossed.
Well, and we've had this discussion on the show many times about the importance of having a team and building the team, that because as a CMO simply can't do any of this by themselves. Okay, last question. Speaking of getting help. Will machines ever be able to do your job?
The CMO job, I have to say no. But I think that you look at the advances that we're making in artificial intelligence, and I think they're making marketers' jobs easier. And I do have hope that some of the challenges we have around trying to assimilate data or develop content and move down a journey to be more personalized and individualized for the customers that we're trying to engage with, that those tasks will become a lot easier because they're so intensive today.
Okay, so your job is safe, but
yes.
maybe not the analyst job. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. That was awesome, and when we get back, we're going to talk about the first 90 days and how, as a new CMO, you set your priorities. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Paige O'Neill, the CMO of Sitecore. You've been on the job just a couple months now. Let's talk about sort of day one and how you approach this challenge.
Yeah, I love this topic. I think it's certainly a topic that you hear people talk about and question a lot. How do you spend your time? I'm week 6, I think, on the job, so just past the first 30 days. And I think that when you step into a role as a new CMO, really a company of any size, there are so many things coming at you from day one that really, I think, a big part of getting off to a good start is making sure you've got alignment on priorities and really understanding who are the key stakeholders that you should be listening to drive those priorities. Does that map to what you heard during the interview process? And so how do you kind of reconcile the picture that you had coming in to what starts to emerge when you come into the company? Hopefully there aren't too many surprises there, but really just being in lockstep with your management team and your marketing team and usually the sales team when it comes to marketing and other parts of the business around what are we going to focus on and charging forward to drive that agenda pretty mercilessly.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you ended up picking up a copy of my book, but the first chapter is all about sort of making sure there's alignment on expectations, because it's game over if there isn't. And I think that's particularly hard because CMOs and CEOs don't necessarily speak the same language. You don't hear CMOs often use the word brand. They talk in terms of ROI and P&Ls and long-term profit and EBITDA and things that sort of appeal to shareholders on a very sort of concrete level, whereas CMOs have to talk about all sorts of other things, that whether it's building the brand or demand generation or sort of a different perspective. So how do you make sure that you are on the same page and in some ways finding a way to translate the language of marketing into the language of the CEO?
Yeah, and I certainly have had the experience where sometimes the CEO's priorities don't necessarily align with the priorities of what the rest of the organization thinks marketing's priorities should be, and that it can be a delicate balance to strike. But I tend to approach all of these processes by coming in, having conversations with people that are in critical roles, listening to what they're telling me, and then kind of goes back to that chief synthesizer role, synthesizing all of those inputs, and then being able to go back and have a dialogue with the CEO around, well, here's what I'm hearing from the business, here's who I talk to, here's what the data is telling us, here's what you're saying, these things don't necessarily reconcile, so let's talk about what that looks like from a prioritization standpoint and what we really think is important for the business as we move forward with me in this role. And often I find that once the CEO hears what's coming from the business, they might be willing to have a different kind of a conversation.
That's interesting. I'm thinking of a podcast that I listened to where they were talking about confirmation bias. And I was thinking, I'm imagining that when you take on a challenge, I mean, this is obviously not your first rodeo. You've done the CMO role a number of times. And as you were interviewing, I suspect you identified some of the challenges that the organization was facing and had some thoughts already on what the solutions might be or the set of solutions. And so one of the risks in that is that you go in with confirmation bias. You're just looking for things that will confirm that your initial impression was true. First of all, does anything that I just said make sense? and two, because there's also the CEO's confirmation bias, right? They have a certain perspective on things, and you could end up either just confirming that because they have it. So how do you sort of, again, this synthesizing is a great word, but how do you make sure that the data that you're picking up, the inputs, are truth?
Yeah, and I think there's always kind of, it's human nature to start to skew the data towards either what you think it should be or what you want it to be, for sure. And marketers never do that, by the way. We never do that.
Never. Never.
But yeah, I think that you have to come in with an open mind, and you have to. So what I have found is that when I'm going about the process of having the conversations, and I'm finding data that might be different than what I thought it was going to be, I know that's where I need to spend the time drilling down. And I've kind of learned that over the years because, honestly, earlier in my career, I might have been more prone to go down a path where there probably was confirmation bias playing some role in the decisions I was making. But then you learn through trial and error that wasn't necessarily the best thing for the business. And so what I've learned is when I start to hear differing inputs, you really want to spend the time there drilling down, understanding where that's coming from, seeing if you're hearing that from other people, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And I think it's very similar to career advice I've heard, that you want to spend the time. And I think I heard this on your show, actually. One of the CMOs said that she wanted to spend her time not where she wanted to, but where she was most needed. And it can be very difficult to strike that balance because, I want to spend my time building out stories and telling messages and doing branding. So you've got to be very open and careful and willing to go to the extra level of detail around an area that you weren't necessarily expecting to hear.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed with new CMOs is that there's a tremendous sense of urgency to get something in the pipeline, particularly in B2B. It's like the sales guys are saying, we need more leads, and there's this rush to show something. And often even, where gosh, if you're going to do a rebranding right, you have to do all the homework on it. That can take months. So what's been your, when do you start making decisions that you think could have a meaningful impact on the business?
Very quickly. And, I'm not someone that spends a lot of time over analyzing. I kind of pride myself on being able to come in and make a quick decision and stick to that. I think that that's just kind of part of my mindset as a CMO, especially given what you have correctly identified, that there's always just a huge sense of urgency around things like demand gen and branding. Those are obviously the big two. And so, I think you've got to spend the time to have the conversations and prioritize going through that process. But what I've learned over the years, and maybe this is confirmation bias, but what I've learned over the years is even as you're going through the process, you start to very quickly be able to see where that data is leading you. So I think you can kind of parallel process some of the decisions that you want to make, even as you continue to go through the process and refine along the way. And I think that enables you to come out with it much more quickly.
Okay, so have there been some aha moments already?
I don't know if they're aha moments, but I think it's, so Sitecore in particular is, my mandate coming in was to really look at, this is a company that has got a very passionate developer community, is known for having product excellence and is known for having really great conversations and relationships with kind of the IT part of the organization or the technical marketing part of the organization. And business is changing. The companies like Sitecore need to be having business conversations with chief digital officers and CMOs. And so the mandate is really around building out that story to be able to talk about what's happening with digital transformation and building customer experiences. And all CMOs are facing this issue in their business. And so it was a pretty clear mandate coming in to help the company evolve to being able to tell that story. And so the aha moment for me has mostly been around the fact that I think the story is not going to be some amazing technology that we need to talk about. It's going to be the business results of our customers. And digital transformation is hard. So showcasing companies that are doing a good job of achieving that today, that's what marketers want to hear about. They want examples. They want blueprints. They want easy steps that they feel they can bring into their business.
Interesting. I'm processing all of this. So as we wrap up this first part of the thing, when you got there, and this again, we're 6 weeks in, have there been some unexpected challenges or good things that sort of you went, oh wow, that's awesome?
There are always unexpected things, and I think that the positive unexpecteds that happened was I came into a company that has got an extremely passionate partner community, unlike any I've seen at any other company. And so I think that is a significant advantage to us from a marketing perspective. And we also have very passionate customers who are willing to share their stories with other customers, which is also just, I've never come into a company and had a positive surprise around, wow, there are so many customers that want to tell our story. So those have been two amazing surprises that I've had. And then I think, the other side, the maybe not so amazing surprise was more around, we've got some work to do as a marketing organization. I think this is always the case, but in terms of how we're structured to support global growth, there are some holes in the team that I didn't expect that I've got to pretty quickly move to address so that we can set the foundation in place to be able to execute on everything that we need to execute on.
Perfect. And I say perfect because I want to dive into that, and we're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we'll talk about thinking through the organization, because I do think that has to be a priority. Again, CMO is only as good as the team that they have underneath them and the tools that team has. And so I'm very curious how you actually approach this. So we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Drew. I wanted to use this break to ask you a single question. Are you a courageous marketer? Do you have the courage to go to your board of directors and say, marketing could drive the growth of this company? We just need 3 times the budget. Do you have the courage to take the big idea that you already have and extend it internally and externally through influencers, through the media, through all of your content? If you're a courageous marketer but aren't sure how to roadmap all of this, I have a big idea for you. It's called Renegade Thinking. It's a program that we've developed and work with exclusively for B2B marketers, generally at large companies. And I want to give you my cell phone, 917-679-8852. Just text Renegade Thinking to 917-679-8852, and we can talk about how you can cut through.
Okay, we're back. And my guest is Paige O'Neill, and we've been talking about the challenges of being a CMO in the first 100 days, how you address those challenges. And we just started to get into this notion of assessing your team and making sure that you have the right skills in the right places. So talk a little bit about how you approach that. And again, I think this has something to do with priorities around demand generation, priorities around brand building, and even sort of broader market strategy. So how did you approach your team?
Absolutely. And, to your point, I think it's different every time. I've gone into, I think this is probably my 5th or 6th CMO role, and it's been at companies, everything from a public company to public companies to early stage startups to late stage startups, and Sitecore's on the late side of, not really a startup, we're kind of a mid-sized company. And I think it's every company is at a different point when you come in, and you've got to assess what are the strategic goals for the company, how is the marketing team going to contribute to that growth, and so in the case of Sitecore, for example, we're poised to break out. We've got, as I've already mentioned, we feel like we're sitting in a wonderful place with our product. We're in a market that is critical and is growing, and we're known amongst our customers and our analysts, but we haven't been telling a top level story that we need to tell to kind of the C-level marketing audiences about topics that are relevant to our business, like digital transformation. And so you have to look at the marketing organization and say, okay, we've got, what's holding us back from telling this story so far? What's holding us back from the objectives that we've set out for the business and the team's role in that from being able to get there to this point? And so in the case of what I found when I came inside the company, I saw that the reason that hadn't been happening so far was there was really strong team in place around looking at classic product marketing areas, about looking at supporting the sales team in global regions, but there was a vacuum of content producers and people that were thinking about a modern notion of how marketing campaigns actually get developed and executed in today's digital global environment. And so obviously that kind of sets the tone for how you're going to organize the team and be able to build out a campaign structure that supports the goals and the content creation of where we need to get to be able to tell and execute these stories.
Yeah, that's certainly a challenge that so many, our clients face at Renegade, and that's what we do, is really help clients with their content strategy, and it's not easy because there is no shortage of content out there, and just for a brand to sort of have credibility as a content provider takes a long time and a tremendous amount of effort. So. I get that, and that is one place where a lot of brands, at least that I talk to, just don't have that in-house expertise. And so that was one area in terms of the team. You had lots of the sort of the nuts and bolts people, but people who could actually think through content campaigns. Okay, what about from a tech stack standpoint? Did you look at that and say, well, we're a little shy on ABM, or being able to whatever? Did you have to do an assessment of your tech stack?
Yeah, and so far where we've landed with the assessment of the tech stack is, not surprisingly, given that we don't feel we're set up to be able to develop and execute the types of campaigns we'd like, we're also, I think, missing a few tricks when it comes to looking at how are we going to target, how are we going to have those personalized interactions with our strategic accounts. But and so we'll certainly get around to that. But the even bigger objective for me and my team in the very near term is going to be looking at our own digital strategy. We're in the business of going in with our partners and talking with marketing organizations about how to transform their digital technology so that they can develop experiences with customers that help them through these times that we're all in, where industries are being disrupted. And if brands aren't changing up the nature of the relationship with the customer is going to go to Amazon, right? And so we're living that on the front lines with our customers every day. But when you lift up the covers here at Sitecore, the cobbler's children don't have the right shoes. We've got shoes. We're using our own technology, and we're doing some interesting things, but it's not where it needs to be in order for us to be able to showcase it in the customer stories that we want to tell. So our first priority, and certainly one of my top 3 priorities, is to develop out the digital strategy that's going to take us to the point where we can say, look at what the Sitecore marketing team is doing with the Sitecore technology.
Exactly. You want to be able to drink your own champagne and be your own best case history. That's one thing that the folks at HubSpot, Eloqua, Marketo have all done so well. And then, Engagio to some extent, I can't, even though I talked to John, I'm still not exactly sure how they use their technique to sell their technique, but I'm confident they are. So, and I was wondering if you were doing that. And that's part A of that response. And part B is, I feel your pain on a personal level. We're like just a few weeks away from, and hopefully maybe by the time the show goes live, the new renegade.com will be up. And one of the things that, we're in the content business, and we believe in something called story hubs. And so finally, we used to have the Drew blog and the Renegade Thinkers Unite. Finally, we're bringing our stuff together. So there is one place where you can get all the renegade thinking that we do. And it's taken us forever because we've been focused on our clients. And, but you can't, you got to be your own best case history. That it's just silly that so many of us in the marketing world are behind as opposed to ahead of our clients. It's not, it doesn't speak well of our own.
It doesn't.
Yeah, right?
It's so challenging, and what inevitably happens is other priorities get in the way. So back to prioritization for that first 100 days. So I've now got to make a very clear business case that digital strategy and transformation by up-leveling our use of our own technology has got to be in my top 2 or 3 priorities versus overhauling demand gen, right? And so that's a tough conversation to have. Demand gen for me right now is it's on my list. It's number 4. I think that when I talk to the CRO, he would say, "What? No, wait, that's got to be number 1."
Right.
So that's going to be very interesting. And I'm week 6, so I'm not finished with that yet.
Well, and I think what's interesting about what you just said is that no doubt if you think about the business case that you're trying to make for using your own technology, it will be the same business case that you will need to make to your prospects. And so going through that process will be very interesting, right? You would think you would discover all the jobs that need to be done. I'm borrowing Clayton Christensen's language there, but but you're right. It's like we had an SEO audit finally, and I went, oh man, okay, that's amazing. And so you have to go through these things and heal thyself, I think, and, right, in order to really help to be empathetic with the challenges that your customers make, because we're so busy saying, hey, we can help you, we can manage all your content, right? That's what you do. But that's one thing. Another thing is actually using it and doing it yourself and doing it on a world-class level. Okay, I beat that point to just a fine pulp. So as we sort of wrap up this episode for all those commuters who like it when we can keep these shows under 30 minutes, talk about, just sort of summarize, if you will, looking ahead for the next, up through the first 90 days. Is there something that we haven't talked about yet that is important that you think would be instructive for other CMOs?
Well, I did come up with a list of things that I think are important in the first 100 days that maybe I could share that list with your listeners.
That would be great.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, building key relationships in the business, learning the business. And this is one that it kind of seems like a no-brainer to say learn the business, but it's the first thing that goes by the wayside when everything starts coming at you once you're in the door. And so really building out the dedicated time to steep yourself in the business to make sure you understand it it's so important and easy to fall off. Shoring up the organization and prioritizing hiring. Another thing that it's easy to kind of put off to the side, but if you don't prioritize getting your team in place, you're going to be behind as you start to firm up your priorities. Figure out the quick wins. That's something that we didn't necessarily talk about that I think is important, and it could buy you some time. If you figure out a quick win that's going to be important to the business, it could buy you some time to get other priorities off the ground. Prioritization and alignment on priorities with the business. Articulating a vision for marketing and how the function needs to evolve and making sure everyone's on board with that. And then finally, be mercenary about how you spend your time. At a certain point, this happens to me every time I come into a job, you're meeting and greeting, everyone wants to come and talk to you, but then you've got to, once you lock down what your priorities are going to be for the first 100 days, you've got to start saying no and focusing on those priorities. Otherwise, you're just going to be overwhelmed.
Yeah. Wow. What a great list, and what a perfect way to wrap up this show. I'd love to spend more time in each of those, but I think they're to some extent self-evident. I think the last one, the time management piece, I mean, some of the best advice I've had as a CEO is only do the things that only you can do, and therefore delegate everything else. And so you talked about having to build a team. Well, you figure out what it is that, what you're missing that you're doing now that you can't delegate, and you find someone to do that. You talked about learning the business. Obviously, that is something that's critical. I love the fact that the first one on your list is relationships, because as CMO, you really are at the mercy of the CFO. You have to get budget, right? The CRO, who has to sort of buy that the leads you're giving them are really valid. The CEO and the board, who are basically giving you maybe some leash length, but not a lot. So those relationships are critical. I often encourage CMOs to actually try to get their office next to the CFO, because that'll sort of cement that relationship on a personal level, and maybe even educate the CFO about how marketing actually works. So the quick wins is a great place for me to sort of finalize this. I think what I heard you say earlier that was so interesting is you're able to make decisions quickly. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to be thinking about, in that nobody's going to hit 1,000. You don't need to hit 1,000, but you do need to make decisions and keep moving forward and learning from them. Sometimes you make mistakes, and great, so fail fast and keep moving. The quick wins are sometimes harder to get than, I've noticed that I've heard that term before, and an experienced CMO can find those quick wins because they've done it in other organizations. It's really hard if it's your first time. All right. With that, first, thanks so much for being on this show. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all of you listening in. I'm grateful that you share mutual interest in lifelong learning. I mean, obviously, you heard Paige earlier talk about she listens to the show. She's still curious, and she's been doing this like me for a while. So I do ask any of you, if you have guest suggestions, do let me know. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You never know. We could end up being on a show together. And if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or write a review on your favorite podcast app. And until next week, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.